Welcome to episode 8 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact. Today's episode features Mara Gordon. Mara is the co-founder of Aunt Zelda's, Octopi Wellness, and Zelira Therapeutics. Mara specializes in the development of cannabis treatment protocols for seriously ill patients. She is a world-renowned pioneer in global medical cannabis. Previously, Mara worked as a process engineer, helping Fortune 500 companies create intelligent software. The cannabis movement and so many patients are fortunate to have such an incredible ambassador fighting for them. Worth noting that this was recorded at the end of September, and apologies for the notification sounds that made it into the recording. Mara and I had a great talk about her journey. Here is Mara Gordon on People Are the Answer. Mara, thank you so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Well, really, it's an honor to have you. And, if you could start off just by telling us a little bit about your background and where you are now.
Well, I was born in a log cabin. No. So my background is as a process engineer, and I was working in technology for years. I was head of the IT methodology for Safeway Worldwide, for example, is my last, what I like to call my last straight job. And then I had stopped working because of my own health issues. And when I came to cannabis and saw that there was just no guidance, no dosing, no lab testing, no nothing, I figured that I would take my skill set that I had already, developed over the years and utilize that to figure out how to solve the dosing issues around cannabis.
Love to hear that. I mean, that's certainly one of the most difficult aspects for patients in cannabis. And we'll certainly dig more into your experience in cannabis. But, I love to sort of integrate how people grew up in their childhoods to where they get to eventually. So, where did you grow up and what was it like?
I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and but I didn't get there till I was already like in seventh grade, I think. But it's the place I lived the longest. My father was in retail, and back in those days, they used to move families around wherever they were opening a new store, not really thinking about the fact that they were disrupting their employees' lives. So we lived, I mean, I was born where I was born. I only lived for 2 weeks. My father had already moved and my mom was waiting to have me to meet him. So it was a crazy, chaotic sort of child. And for somebody like me, who's contrary to what people think, who's basically very introverted, it fed my ability to, number one, take care of myself and think for myself and everything else, because it wasn't like I moved new places and became the life of the party. I would move new places and I would make friends with one person, and that would be kind of my way of being. Growing up in Dallas, the other thing that I think that's important to mention is that my father was Lubavitcher Chassid. And for people who don't know what that is, he was I don't want to say ultra Orthodox because it's the Hasidim are different than the Orthodox, but the very strict abiding by the rules of Judaism. I went to yeshiva through school, and so I was never really quite integrated into my neighborhood friends or anything like that, because they all went to public school and or private school, more like, to go to a fancy private school, not a place where it was segregated of males and females. So that certainly helped to form my childhood, especially since my mother was not Orthodox and my two older sisters were not. So I was kind of the only one in the family that was singled out for this. What it did, though, is it reinforced the fact that the culture in my house was one of being of service. very much abide by the Tikkun Olam. It's our job to save the world. And I took that to heart. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear that. I frequently mentioned Tikkun Olam, which was very much, what my dad consistently spoke about, and I think that it stuck with both of us in terms of where we've taken our lives and careers. Um, so it sounds like growing up in that way was really impactful for your life.
It's very impactful. It helped me obviously to understand people from other cultures and other and other ways of being. I had several teachers that had tattoos on their arms from Nazi Germany, and that was obviously adding a realism to history in a way. Because I mean, obviously, based upon my age, it wasn't distant history. It was as close to my upbringing as 9/11 is to people now, which people don't realize, but it really was. It was very, I mean, it was fresh. And I think that my upbringing also helped me to be adaptable, because when you move a lot and when you're not like everybody else and you don't have cultural similarities with everybody around you, because I mean Dallas is not a hotbed of the Hasidic movement. There are not a lot of Hasidic Jews there. I learned how to get along in some ways, but also to embrace the fact that I was different and being different was okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the being different is okay aspect has certainly resonated long term because you were an innovator in a space where people often were scared to touch it or scared to talk about it.
Right. You're 100% right. I mean, it never occurred to me to measure my worth or success through anybody else's eyes other than my own. And by my own barometer of what it means to be successful or what it means to be, contributing to the world and all those things. Because as soon as I start seeing myself through somebody else's eyes, um, then I have all their prejudice and their fears and everything else coming at me. And in cannabis in particular, it was interesting how I would listen to what people would say to me, things like, oh, cannabis cannot be dosed. Oh, there's no point in lab testing it because it doesn't matter. I know how it feels when I use it. I mean, some of these, nebulous sorts of things. And I kept thinking to myself, if that's your approach, it explains perfectly why cannabis has failed to become a medicine. So instead of us doing more of the same that doesn't work, maybe it's time to do something different.
Yeah, I love that mindset. I mean, I try to go into various industries with that mindset that just because something's always been the case or always been done a certain way, that doesn't mean you shouldn't challenge it. And, bravo to you for stepping up and challenging those norms.
Thank you. As a process engineer, I was used to going into organizations because I was mostly a consultant. Safeway was I only went to work with Safeway right after 9/11 because air travel became so complicated and everything else. Of course, they had me on an airplane the first week, even though they promised they wouldn't, but that's another podcast. But I was accustomed to going into organizations and telling their IT departments, for example, everything you're doing wrong, and we're going to change how you do it. So if I measured my value and my worth only by how popular I was or whether people liked me, I don't think I would have accomplished quite as much in my life as I believe I have.
Yeah. It's interesting. I actually work with a few different people that have a process management background, and it does seem like that kind of forced them to push people against what they're used to doing, going into business and changing up these operations that people have been so used to because they're actually trying to make progress. And I know that there's been plenty of heads butting against the walls during that. So I'm sure that added even more fuel to your fire and to your ability to, push things in new directions.
Yeah, I mean, it's like water off a duck's back. I mean, I can't take it personally. And the way I figure is anybody that has a hard time with me, that's more of a reflection of themselves than it is about me. So,
Yeah.
doesn't bother me. I have often said though that in the cannabis space, um, I'm a hare in a world of I'm a turtle in a world of hares, because I've been saying the same thing and working on the same things, moving, steadily along all these years, while I've watched all these people with, chasing the latest shiny object. And most of those people aren't around anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, we've seen so many people jump in and out of the cannabis space that were looking to make a quick buck. And not without a lot of respect for the history of the plant and the history of the movement. And even myself in the space, I've done okay, but there's certainly people that came in for a money grab that actually got it. But I tend to stick to my principles and theories, and have confidence that they'll make the most sense long term.
There's always going to be people that are get a windfall. There's going to be the guy that bought a Bitcoin, and or whatever, and now it's worth a gazillion dollars. Kudos to them. They're the exception in a planet of 7 billion people. And if you measure yourself against them, you'll always come out short. So, I know that there's always going to be the winners, but I also am not willing to do the sorts of things that I find that a lot of those people have to do in order to achieve that kind of
Right.
success. Yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, you carry your principles through with all that you do. You talked about, your work in process engineering prior to cannabis. And, I was wondering if there was something you really liked about what you did there that kind of led you on your path when you first got into cannabis.
Actually, yes, it was interesting that what I was doing with process engineering, it became very clear that the principles of it could be applied in any context, not just sophisticated, $50 billion software development projects. It could work for remodeling your house if you apply the things. So what I really liked doing was figuring out the what all had to be done, what had to be accomplished, what were the components, what were the ingredients that were going to be required in a process in order to be able to achieve a goal, and then figure out the right order to do them in to eliminate the most risk of success. And so that was really how I approached cannabis as well. I mean, I had the building blocks to do it, so to speak. When I think about whenever I look at cannabis, I look at it the same way about building a system, and that is that you attack the most difficult first. The most difficult at first was lab testing, and getting anybody to start lab testing and start looking at the medicine with that, and then taking those and creating medicines that could be accurately and consistently dosed, and being able to repeat the process over and over again. That's the whole principles of any kind of engineering thing, is to make something where it has no holes in the system, where you can keep repeating it and you can predict what the outcomes are going to be. And that's just what I applied to cannabis, the same thing. And I love it. I love being able to think that way. As I'm sure I've developed a software platform that doctors use and all, utilizing those principles and those methodologies. And it's very exciting because you think about everything. It's the opposite of laser focus. When you're developing a system, you have to get out of the box and think of every possible eventuality, and then a roadmap for how to work with that. And so it was a piece of cake. Cannabis is not nearly as complicated as multiple country, reinsurer, legacy. When I went to Safeway, I was integrating 98 legacy systems. Yeah,
I'm
because
sure.
they grew to be second largest in the world through acquisition. So all those acquired their systems had to all talk to each other. So if I could solve that, I could solve cannabis.
That's a great way to put it. That sounds like quite the complicated process. And
Right.
um, yeah, I'm curious, what first got you into cannabis and connected with it?
I had tried it, of course, in the 70s and some other times, off and on over the years, a few times, never really liked it. But first, I had my health issues required that I was on a significant number of pharmaceuticals. And I had stopped taking most of them because they weren't helping. It was just making me a zombie. And I decided I wanted my life back. But in typical form, I didn't really worry about myself and I just continued my suffering. But my husband, who had broken his back, needed to have surgery and had refused to have it because he would not take opioids. At this point now, he's been sober for 33 years. But at the time, it was 20 years or whatever. And he said, there's no way I'm going to have the surgery because they're going to put me on opioids. And then I'm not going to be, and the doctor had already said, you'll probably be on them the rest of your life. And he said, no. So we started looking for alternatives to it. A good friend said that, she was making brownies for her boyfriend. And once we started doing the research, and then once I didn't try the brownie, but I tried seeing what it could do for my pain, I was in shock at how well it worked. And that was what really started the whole journey was, if this works for me, it can work for other people. And why has no doctor ever mentioned to me that this is an option? And I was furious. And so even the doctor that I went to get a medical card at the time, which was required in California, he acted like I was doing a backdoor abortion. I mean, he was treating it like it was this, shameful thing, and like ushering me through a different door in his office because he was a regular doctor. I didn't know any better. I didn't know you could go to a doc in a box. And I was just appalled at the whole system because I wanted to use this legitimately. I wanted to use it correctly, and I only wanted to use it for my health issues. I wasn't looking for recreating with it. I was just looking to get out of suffering. And so that was what started the journey.
It's incredible to hear that. And I know I've talked to patients in the past with somewhat similar stories. And it's always mind-boggling to so many people when they realize the potential health benefits and, the lack of potential downsides, the relative lack compared to opioids. And to see how much stigma there was then, I'm glad to see how it's lessened since, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yes, we still have a lot of work to do. There are still too many doctors that think it's just a joke, or that the science isn't there, or that we need more studies. Yes, we need more studies, but in the meantime, let's help people not to be suffering. I think the one danger that we have in the cannabis conversation is that because we spend so much of our time around other people and communicating with other people that are, cannabis this, cannabis that, we forget that the vast majority of people out there are cannabis naive, or they tried it many, many years ago. I read a number today that said that 40% of all Americans have purchased a cannabis product. I would beg to say they're adding hemp into there for that kind of a number, and I don't believe it. Because I talk to way too many doctors and people, all over who, they don't even know cannabis from marijuana. They don't know that they're the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you that that's pretty hard to believe. And even if it truly is the case, the knowledge base of that group of people that have tried it is very low. So I certainly think education around this is incredibly important. And like you said, there's certainly a lot of research needed, and it's been tougher to do than we'd like. And let's pile it on, but just we can very factually state that it doesn't cause a lot of the problems that many opioids cause.
Many opioids and many other things, all anti-anxiety, anti-emetic, all sorts of other drugs out there. I often talk about the trifecta of the low-hanging fruit in cannabis, pain, anxiety, and sleep, that there are no good pharmaceuticals out there for any of those three things. And cannabis is a viable option potentially for all of those
Yeah.
without the negative side effects and also actually working.
Yeah, agreed. And I'd love to get a better understanding of your journey. I know that you've helped develop cannabis treatment protocols for very ill patients. You're really, been a pioneer in the medical cannabis space, and I'd love to kind of hear what that journey has been like and what you're up to right now.
Uh, when I first started on this journey, I was kind of surprised at the beginning at the negative pushback that I got from legacy industry people.
Mm,
And I think a lot of them mistakenly thought that I was discounting their work because I was holding up a mirror in a lot of ways to what worked and what didn't. Um, Granted, I probably did bring my stereotypes with me because it was a new world to me, and I hope that I've made my amends over the years to make up for any judgments I may have made about people previously. But my journey, it was like at first, I was surprised when people would ask me to make them medicine. I didn't mean to start a company. I had no intention of starting a company, which I know is pretty hilarious at this stage. But I mean, it never even occurred to me to start. But people started seeing how, friends, how Stuart and I, my husband and I, were doing so much better and how we looked, and you're fantastic and you're moving around and yada, yada, yada. And so I said to people, I will make medicine for you under the condition that I get the data from you on what's working, what's not, how it's working. If you're using it for sleep, how many hours did you sleep? How long did it take to get to sleep? How did you feel when you woke up? I mean, I was asking all of the, type of medical questions. And it's like, and at first there was no lab testing. So I was like weighing every piece. I knew how much I had put in. I was running the math on it and, to estimate. And very quickly went from that stage to just making the oils so that they were measurable. When I started lab testing, I want to say it was April 2011, and that was a game changer. I attended my first patients at a time in 2012, and I was blown away by the type of research that was going on preclinically around the world, but not clinically. And Mark Ware, who was in a very different position then from Canada, he stood up and he said, you have, I can't remember the number, was it 13 or 3 or 5, whatever it was in 2012. You have that many laboratories in the US for data collection. Why isn't anybody collecting it? And I put up my hand from the back of the room, like one of the few non-scientists that was there. And I said, I am. I am collecting it. I am asking these questions. And doctors started sending their patients to me so that they could get quality medicine, but also guidance and oversight. And I was giving the feedback to the doctors of what I'm giving them and how it's working. And that's what started the whole, interaction and conversation. Interestingly enough, I was a presenter at Patients at a Time 2 years later. And so, which was kind of a big deal to me at the time. And now I'm on their advisory board. So that
It's
was
amazing.
a pretty cool step up on the journey. But I made the medicine. I was collecting the data. And about 2012, I started creating my software platform. And we've been utilizing it internally with doctors and nurses for all these years. And then the gift of COVID, I like to say, was the fact that I haven't been on an airplane every week somewhere. And as a result, I've been able to focus on rebuilding it for distribution to to other than my doctors that are working with our patients. And it's always been product agnostic. I never have done anything around my own products. My products were only for the purposes of R&D. And as long as we had lab results for a medicine, we could help people on how to use them. But at the beginning, actually on March 13th last year, the day that California shut down, I happened to be at breakfast that day with a gentleman who had heard about me. He says that he's tired of giving, money every year at these big gala fundraisers for cancer, and he wanted to do something more. And he had heard about me, and we had met a couple of times, and he invited me to breakfast, and we were there. And I mentioned at that time that about my software platform that apparently he didn't know about already. And he asked if he could see it, and so we made an arrangements for us to do it by on Skype. I think we did at the time. Doesn't that sound like an antique? I think we did it on Skype or something. And he got very quiet afterwards. And this was like a Thursday, I think. And he called me the following Monday, and he said, "My wife and I have discussed it over the weekend, and we would like to fund the rebuild of your platform."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
incredible.
That has been a game changer for me, because I was bootstrapping. Other than I took a little bit of money in 2015 from my partners in Zelda Therapeutics, which is now Zelira Therapeutics, and then I paid that back. It's all been out of my own pocket all these years.
Yeah.
So this was really, I get to focus on the part that I'm good at, and I don't have to do the business part, which I'm not good at.
Right. Well, it's great to hear that you have that opportunity. And I think it highlights, the tremendous foresight you had to start collecting the data, and then for that to lead into the software. And now this opportunity you've come upon, it's all because of kind of where your brain was at initially. And I think that goes back to the engineering background.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting, Jeffrey, is I look at my old lab books, because I always write in either composition books or something like we had in high school. I just think that, I want to write in paper that's sewn together, not glued. And I was looking back through some of mine from like 2012, early 2012, and I actually had drawn the model of what a modern distribution channel should look like for cannabis medicine. I actually had, what the store should be in the layout in the front, the middle, the back, how it should be as far as, not the physical description of it, but I modeled it on like the old Walgreens or CVS, where the front's the junk food, in other words, the rec market.
Right.
The back in front of the pharmacy is the OTC or the wellness type products. Or I like to call them self-administered products, because it's not about wellness necessarily. It's just people are doing it without guidance necessarily. And then the behind the counter, which is the prescription, which is the more serious medicine where you really need to have a doctor monitoring you. And it's getting closer and closer and closer to that. Now, I would modify that at this stage, though, and say that I believe that cannabis medicine is a completely different market, different industry than the cannabis industry. I consider myself in the healthcare industry, not the cannabis industry. And I don't think that they belong in the same conversation necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. One I'm happy that you're sharing. My mindset around it has been like, we started off from a political side and doing the medical, and now we've gone into adult use, and they've sort of gotten sandwiched together. But I certainly envision a world where they continue to separate, and we do have sort of a more, for lack of a better term, like pharmaceutical type space within cannabis that is very medically focused. And then, you have the separate adult use market.
Right. If you think about go back to the Walgreens, analogy, the front of the store is where they have the Hershey bars and the gummy bears and all that stuff. That the buyer for that department is not the same buyer as the drugs behind the pharmaceutical counter. You don't have the same people driving it, inventorying it, it's just not. It's just happened to be where they're sharing space and in a place. One of the outcomes from all the years that I've been doing this that I've come to realize is that, or the data really shows me is that real patients have no interest in going to a dispensary. They just want their medicine to show up, every 60 to 90 days, however much that whenever they do their refills, they just want it to show up over and over again. They can take it. They don't want to go shopping because they're not shopping. They're picking up their medicine. And there's no real incentive in the current way that dispensaries purchase their inventory to carry the types of products that a sick person might need. For example, I have a heart condition, and I have been through every drug that they have. And the only drug that works for me that doesn't just make me incapacitated is an old drug that nobody uses anymore. So most pharmacies don't carry it. But once I make a relationship with a pharmacy and they see that I'm going to be doing it, they make sure they have it in stock for me every 90 days. Can you imagine a world where dispensaries would do that?
It would be incredible. And I certainly think that it's something that we need to get to.
Right. Oh, 100%. I also think that we need to, allow, crossing state lines with your medicine. I mean, you should not be, yes, it's insane that we can't go across the state line as businesses with our products. But for a validated, legitimate medical patient in the state of Massachusetts, for example, that has to travel to California to risk imprisonment getting on an airplane with their medicine is criminal.
I agreed. It's so backwards, and it's a shame that this is the route that we've had to take to get any type of change in our country. But I do believe that we're getting to a place where that will be possible. I know that we're certainly pushing for federal changes, um, and it's interesting because I know there obviously are medical cannabis patients that travel and take that risk, and for so many of them, it's kind of not even a second thought because they need their medicine to get through the day. So it's certainly a frustrating situation, and one that I hope we'll continue to make progress on.
I'll tell you something funny. I was standing at a podium in, I don't remember, somewhere in Australia in 2014. And I said, of course, that it's been all over the place, this thing of me saying this. I stood there and said, carrying my medicine with me is a human right. It is my right to do this. And of course, I was expecting at that point to get arrested any minute because I had brought my medicine. I take my dipper everywhere and my extract everywhere. And it never even went. I've taken it to Poland and the Czech Republic and all over, anywhere that I've been. And it's like, it's that, or you're going to take me to the hospital because I'm going to end up back in the hospital without it, so I need it that much. It's my medicine. It's not just like I use it to feel better.
Right.
I use it to control my life, to maintain life.
Has that resulted in any difficult circumstances?
No. And I think it's because it never even would occur to me that somebody would have the right to question my medicine. And because I truly 100% believe that it's medicine down to every fiber of my body, and not just I say that wink, wink, I really do internalize that belief, that I have no energy around it that's any other way. And I believe that, that when people oftentimes they act suspiciously or they energetically, that might sound a little foo-foo, but it never would occur to me that anybody would check my medicine.
Yeah.
I actually took with me a dozen bottles of topical to Chile one time. And I got to the airport and it was about 3:00 in the morning. And I had not Ziplocked. I had used what's it called? Like where it shrinks, you put in the heat.
Vacuum sealer.
Vacuum sealer. Thank you. I had vacuum sealed the whole thing. I had like 6 and 6 or something. And it's 3 in the morning, and the going through customs, they opened them up and they checked each and every jar, and the jars say on them THC, they say all that. And they opened them and they closed them, opened them, closed them up. And they were like, thank you very much. And I said, I just have to ask you, what were you looking for? I didn't say, do you not realize this is full of THC? Obviously. I said, what were you looking for? And they said, honey. They were looking for illegal honey being brought into the country.
Interesting.
So the one and only time, knock on wood, that I
Right.
could, that I was potentially, it wasn't honey.
Yeah. And that's a really good story to highlight, because I mean that's my perspective on it in a way. If you're just trying to help yourself, if you're not doing anything to hurt anyone, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to travel with your medication. So a big part of your kind of perspective on cannabis medicine is dosage. Could you talk more about your work in dosage?
Yes. One of the things that one of the catalysts for collecting the data was to be able to understand how much it would take to accomplish various objectives. So, in addition to finding out diagnostics and, pharmaceuticals and comorbidities and all the things on a patient, one of the chief questions that we always ask is, what is your objective? Why are you including cannabis into your regimen? Why do you want to use this? And then we create a way of measuring against what their objective is, right? For example, we had a new woman that came to us today. She's 60 years old. She has stage 3 uterine cancer. She started chemotherapy yesterday, and I asked her what her objective is. My mind is thinking, okay, I'm going to start her on this and that and da 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 da. But her objective was to just handle the side effects of chemotherapy. So once we know that it's going to be a much lower dose than one that's like a cancer killing regimen. And then in the data, we've been able to find established patterns. For example, the older the patient, the lower the dose. Children need far more than adults do in order to accomplish the same thing. We've also found that in most cases, obviously these are all generalizations, women need a lower dose than men do. It has nothing to do with their body weight, though. It has to do with a lot of other factors. But that's the case. Mainly having to do with the fact that women tend to want to have they have less of a tolerance for losing a sense of control, and where men don't seem to have this quite as much. All stereotypes, all generalizations, but stereotypes are there because there's a lot of evidence that shows to support it. I also have found that if you start very slowly and you allow somebody to titrate up in a way where they do not have anxiety or feel any kind of, disassociative in using it, then they are more likely to stick with the regimen. Also, certain cannabinoid terpene profiles tend to create certain effects in patients based upon other criteria that you wouldn't necessarily expect. For example, cultivars that have high levels of alpha-pinene may make somebody feel extremely anxious, but it's somebody who has ADHD or OCD or PTSD or something like that, it might make them feel very focused. So you have to ask a lot of questions and get a lot of feedback to be able to figure out how to start. Once you've done that, to the extent that we have with the sheer numbers of patients, the amount of data that's come in, we're able to make fairly good predictions on what's going to work as a target point for a particular diagnosis and objective. You look at enough of the criteria and you say, okay, we've treated 650 people with this diagnosis, and then between these ages and these ages, and this is the range of profiles of medicine and dosing protocols. So it's a good idea to start there. Obviously, we don't have double-blind clinical trial data on things because it's just not really available. Though we have trialed my insomnia formula. It's gone through clinical trials through Zelira Therapeutics, and it's now in the market as Zenabol. Yeah.
That's incredible. It's amazing to hear of that type of progress, and that, it's getting to a point where it's going to be changing so many lives, and, it clearly already has, but it's only going to be growing from there.
Mhm. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
So you mentioned in the discussion, potential cancer killing regimens. Um, is is that something that you've experienced? And what are some things that you've seen this plant do that most people don't know about?
What have I seen it do? Well, I've seen it. I've seen people alive that their doctors were predicted to not be alive at this stage. I am always cautious to say that cannabis is the reason, the solution. However, I believe that we have enough scientific data at this stage, both through clinical and preclinical, primarily preclinical, to show that THC, for example, um, activates the cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2, which start the chemical cascade that results in apoptosis that kills the cancer cells, basically commit suicide. That's a fact. That's a fact. Whether they're going to do it at a rate that's going to be significant enough for any particular, there's over 200 different types of cancers, and every one of those has their genetic anomaly and everything else. But we know enough to know that there's enough history and evidence, both anecdotal and from preclinical and clinical work, to incorporate it into a cancer patient's regimen. I know that GW has a study they've been doing for years on GBMs, and it was supposed to be out, and it was supposed to be out, and it was supposed to be out, the results, and they kept putting it off because people were staying alive. And so it's like, yeah, so they weren't, that's just an example. But I can point to so many of the people that we've helped over the years that, statistically, they just should not be alive, and they are. Cannabis can help them make it through the regimen more effectively. It can also potentially reduce the need for all the other medications. And we have done preclinical work on 3 major subtypes of breast cancer utilizing full plant THC, comparing it to single molecule in these Frankenstein products. And it works in all cases. It worked on these 3 types of breast cancer, comparing it to the target drug that's in the market for those 3. It worked as well on all 3 as the cancer medicine, as the chemotherapy drug it did itself.
That's remarkable. And talking about GBMs, that's how my dad passed away, so it's something that hits very close to home. That was before I knew anything about cannabis when that happened. So to think that some other people may be avoiding some of the things that happened on his end is exciting. And I can't wait till the research doors are truly unlocked in cannabis, and we've got researchers all over the world doing 10 to 1,000 times more than they already are, because I think we're going to continue to learn some incredible things about the cannabis plant and what it can do.
I agree, and I would like to see cannabis stay in its own lane, though, and not try to be a pharmaceutical. It's a biopharmaceutical. It's a complex botanical that needs to remain a complex botanical. When people say, "Oh, we need to," I'm going to come out with this drug and that drug, I'm saying we already have one. It's called Marinol, Durabinol. We already have a pharmaceutical of the molecule of THC, and it's horrible. It's better than some of the other drugs, but it's horrible. One and done. So now let's figure out where it's appropriate. And I've always said that what I'm doing is for the purpose of empowering people who should be doing this instead of me.
Right.
It's for, I want doctors to be doing this research. I want scientists to be doing this research. I want governments to be regulating this in a fair way that's designed to help patients and protect them and not just drive revenue. And so that I can sit back and retire. I'm old and tired, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really good. That's a good perspective on this. I mean, I would love for all of those types of people to get involved. It took you pioneering it to push it in this direction, and hopefully those people will start to pick up some of that work. And I think that there's an exciting array of possibilities in the future. And let's say that there's a patient listening, that has cancer and is looking to use cannabis, or, maybe has anxiety or other issues. You know, what do you think are the best resources for them to determine what products or regimens are best for them?
Well, I would always, without exception, recommend, especially for a cancer patient, that they utilize medical cannabis under doctor supervision. And the reason I say that, and I don't mean, and I say doctor, I should say physician, because I don't mean, a doctor of economy. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that use that doctor and then don't bother letting you know that they're actually not a medical doctor. But I believe that that's important because you have so many possible, I don't want to be scare tactics here, but you have things like drug on drug interaction potential. CBD in particular is a lot more challenging with other pharmaceuticals because of the way that so many drugs are metabolized through the body. CBD can mess with that a lot through the cytochrome P450 system in the liver, without getting too technical. So you want to make sure you're doing it under medical supervision for that reason. Also, if you're using any kind of immunotherapies, you want to be very careful in how you use it, and not using CBD at the same time that you're using immunotherapies until we have more studies on it, because there's some challenges in what the studies that we do have. But I want to make sure that people are transparent with their medical professionals. Like, even if your doctor is not supporting it, let them know what you're doing anyway, because the way that we break down barriers is through education and the normalization of cannabis as a medicine. I would suggest that anybody that's starting out, that they stay off of Facebook, they stay off of Twitter, they don't go to these ridiculous, they don't Google, what to do, but that they go to somebody who's legitimate. The Society of Cannabis Clinicians has a good listing, a good directory of doctors in various areas. So that's the first thing that I would do. The other thing is I would probably I would stay away from the dispensaries for my education for the most part. I mean, there are always exceptions, but for the most part. And I would search out a physician, even if they're not in your own state, that you can consult with through telemedicine and things like that to find out what to do. I think that people's success is higher when they have supervision than it is when they just try it on their own. For one thing, they don't know what to try, and they end up trying something and saying, "Oh, I tried it, it didn't work for me," and then they go on to something else when they didn't try the right thing, the right dose, or whatever. So that's the first thing that I would do. I think that you call me a pioneer a couple of times, and I think I was just in the right place at the right time, asking the right questions. And you've known me for years. I'm an old Jewish woman that's non-threatening. I'm not a hippie. I'm not even particularly, I don't get high with anybody. I don't pass a joint around. Of course, now nobody should, COVID. But I mean, that's just not who I am. I think I was an easy person for the cannabis world to point to and say, "See, we're normal, we're legitimate, we're not all hippy dippy."
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out. I think that, as we get to a point where we're alleviating stigma further, it's important for people to realize that the spectrum of people that utilize cannabis for a variety of reasons ranges quite a bit. It's not necessarily your stereotypical stoner.
Exactly. And I'll tell you something even funnier than that is, I mean, here I live in northern, now I live in Mexico, but I was living in Northern California. And I went to Oregon to buy cannabis because I didn't know anybody in California who had any or grew or anything. I knew one grower in Oregon. So I drove up there and got it. Now I mean, I couldn't believe once people started finding out what I do, how many people I already knew that had cannabis grows in their backyard or whatever. I had no clue. I was completely clueless about it.
Yeah. And that's something that I've seen getting more involved in the space over the years is comfort levels increase as they get to know someone and as they get an understanding of, where their values lie.
Right. Well, I just didn't know that it was even an option. I mean, I had seen the TV show Weeds, and I had no idea that there were actually dispensaries. I mean, I had no idea that there were places that people could go and buy it. I mean, I was just clueless. I had no idea. And so I would say the industry did a pretty bad job of self-promotion. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even though it was medical, it was wink, wink medical.
Right. There was a lot of hiding in the shadows, and the original medical law in California was pretty wide open and not that heavily regulated. So, certainly some great actors, but also some bad actors out there.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and there's some people that I still have tremendous respect for doing fantastic work, people like Uwe Blessing from Cannabis, who if you ever have him on, he's just amazing. He and I have had this, mutual admiration society for the last, decade or more. And there are really smart, dedicated people who haven't gone out of their lane in this. It's just the ones that are boisterous and louder seem to be the ones that get more attention.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned how you sort of almost accidentally ended up on the business side. Um, so tell me a little more about, what businesses you've been working on.
You mean from the beginning of this? So, okay, so I figured out what it was going to take at the very beginning, looking at the various pieces of the puzzle. Remember, keeping in mind that solving the dosing conundrum was all I was trying to do. All I cared about was how to dose this plant. It wasn't about how can I get rich on this plant. It wasn't about, how many different SKUs could I have? It was like, how do you dose it? And I thought, okay, you have to have lab tested medicine. You got to, first of all, you have to start out with well-grown product. Then you have to have lab tested medicine so you know what's in it. You have to have an understanding of the endocannabinoid system, and you have to have medical professionals that understand the endocannabinoid system. You have to be able to accurately dose the medicine that you've tested so that you can give it to patients, and then you have to have a feedback loop all the way through that to be able to do it over and over. So this is my recipe for how to solve the dosing conundrum. So I don't believe in private lab testing, first of all, but that's a separate topic. But I certainly don't think that product companies should own testing labs, So I found a testing lab, check, got that done. Then I had to understand the endocannabinoid system. So I started my education doing all that. I mean, obviously I was already learning about it, but I went ahead and I got educated, and I started educating. I started teaching other people what I was learning and lecturing every chance I got. Then I understood that doctors needed to understand the endocannabinoid system and how it works. So I started teaching them. So I created a company. This is where I'm going with this. I created a medical practice for doctors and nurses to work at, because at the time, a physician was not allowed to work for a company that touched the plant. So I had to start a separate company for the doctors so that they could interact with the patients in a safe way. And they were utilizing the software platform that, oh yeah, I started a company with a software platform. And then we were looking at all this data we were collecting, And it became very clear that we need to validate the data through preclinical and clinical trials. Well, that takes a lot of money to do that kind of work. So I better start another company that makes lots and lots of money for this purpose. And that's when we started Zelda Therapeutics, which is now Zelira. And it was strictly to fund preclinical and clinical research on that. And then during COVID, I started Octopi Wellness, which is the rebuild of my software platform. And so now Aunt Zelda's is made in South Africa and in Brazil. And my platform is all over the world. And Calispring Spring Wellness, fortunately, was able to go away because the doctors they get it now. They can just sign on to the system. I don't have to run another company. And Zelira, I stepped off the board of there and it's still going. So I got all these plates still spinning and we're still doing the work. I just don't have to do it anymore, which is nice.
Well, congratulations on where you've made it to, and the fact that you've gotten all those plates spinning in the first place. And I'm excited to see where things go.
Me too. Me
Yeah.
too. Stay tuned.
Uh, so you got involved with a couple of films, to my understanding. Weed the People. I believe there was another one as well. Could you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, there's actually two more. One of them is Mary Jane's The Women of Weed, and by Wendy Borman. And the third one is The Medicine and Marijuana, which was produced by the head of internal medicine, I believe, at University of New Mexico, who's a bunch of doctors that put it together.
Mhm.
But the first one, Weed the People, was probably the one that the most people know about, or more people know about, I should say. And yeah, and I want to say it was like 2012, towards the end of 2012, Ricky Lake's late husband, Christian Evans, approached me, and they had a little girl that was an uber fan of Ricky's when she was on Dancing with the Stars, who had a rare disease, and they wanted to help her with cannabis, and they were going to document the whole thing, and they wanted me to take care of her. And I said, no interest whatsoever. I mean, I'd already at that point, I'd had several people wanting to do documentaries and follow me around. But my experience with them was they already had a decision on what was going to be outcomes, and then they just wanted to fill in the story behind it. And I wasn't going to be anybody's propaganda tool. So I agreed to do it. The little girl ended up, her mother got scared and backed out, but at that time we'd already started. And I was sitting Shiva for my sister, and I got an emergency text from Abby Epstein, who's the director of the documentary, saying there's this 8-month-old baby. She has, optical glioma. She needs your help. And so I turned to my family and I said, well, in Judaism, the living always, come before the dead. And here's a baby that needs my help. So I flew back and went down and started working with her. And then subsequently, quite a few other children that are in the film. The cameras, I have to say, I was not the best participant because I don't like a camera on me necessarily. But the cameras did follow me around from time to time over the next 5.5 years, which was, interesting. And when I watch it, it's like, I started out, I was skinny, and then I was heavy, and then I was thin again, and then I was heavy, my hair was short, my hair was long, it was all these things. But then, it was released, and I think it made a really big impact. We were already working on it when the CNN documentary Weeds came on with Sanjay Gupta. We were already working on the documentary. And so I knew that it was going to be powerful. And then Christian ended up sadly succumbing to his mental illness and committed suicide, and everything kind of got into flux for a while, but fortunately the film still got out there. Now, Mary Jane's Women of Weed is Wendy Borman, was asking really good questions like, is cannabis medicine? Is it for real? Is it, what are the issues around it? Social justice, all these different categories. And she followed, I think there's 30 of us in the film, different women in different segments of it. Me and Sue Sicily are kind of, put together as the medical group, where it's like, you got your edibles people, you've got your farmers, and that was really interesting as well.
That's great. I mean, on Weed the People, I'm really glad that was able to get out despite some of the difficulties. And just that it was such a long process, but that it was able to be seen through.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned Dr. Sue Sicily. I'm a huge fan of hers, so glad to hear that she was part of that project as well. And I've been fortunate enough to see Weed the People, but I will certainly take a look at the other two as well.
Yeah, Mary Jane is the Women of Weed. It's really a lot of fun. It's a good film. It Wendy Borman at that time had never tried cannabis,
Mhm.
and she ended up trying it at the end. And she does it with like her group of the people, like Wanda James is in there, Jennifer Murray's, and I mean it's pretty well a who's who of all of us that have been around for a long time, that are in there. AC Braddock is in there, Juliana from Treatables. And I mean, it's a fun group. When we had the premiere, it was a lot of fun getting together, all of us.
I'm sure that's awesome, and it's great to see women in cannabis celebrated. It's certainly we needed to diversify the industry ever since it started turning into a business, and starting to see more and more women and more people of color come in, and hopefully that trend continues.
Um, I'm gonna go a little sideways on you on that one. I think that the legalization and expansion of cannabis has been terrible for women. Women were the heads of their companies. Women's were the ones that were making formulations and creating the products and doing all the innovation, taking care of patients, doing all this, until the bros came in and started bringing the money, and then it became about CPGs, and then it started becoming all this. And this is one of the things that Wendy talks about in the film also, the percentage of women that are at the head of companies now is so much lower than it was a decade ago. And if you do look at the women that are coming in, what positions are they coming in at? They're not coming in at CEOs. They're not coming in even necessarily as COO. A lot of them are coming in as, head of marketing, head of sales, customer relations, that kind of thing. And the money that's being attracted and given to female entrepreneurs towards versus males is significantly less. Same thing with people of color. You have a lot of tokenism going on with women and people of color. And I think that we can do a lot better job. So one of the things I do whenever I'm asked to be part of a group, because for whatever reason, a lot of people like to have my name on their website. The first thing I look to see is how many women, how many people of color, and in what positions.
Yeah,
To make
that's
sure it's not tokenism.
yeah, it's a really important aspect. And I mean, I've certainly seen that there haven't been enough women and people of color in executive roles in the space. I mean, I'd like to think that it's improving, but I don't have the statistics in front of me, and there's certainly a ton of work we need to do. And I similarly take a look at businesses that I'm asked to be involved in to see kind of how they're doing on that front. But hopefully some of the good players that are actually working to do this properly will start to rise to the top, and we'll see more of it. But it's definitely going to take a lot of work and dedication and mindfulness.
And I'm very happy to hear that you do that. And I because it's going to take the men, unfortunately, you know, drawing a line. I remember about 3 or 4 years ago, it may not have been that long, with COVID, time is like irrelevant.
Yeah.
It was before. um, Ian Sieb had been asked to sit on a panel, and he refused to sit on it because there was no women on it. And it's going to take that sort of, bravery and, putting your money where your mouth is kind of thing to really start moving it. When there has to be consequences for bad behaviors. You can't just talk to it and go, oh, isn't that awful? And then go back to your gourmet life. You have to actually have consequences, unfortunately, in order to precipitate change.
Yeah, that's definitely the truth. And hopefully we're heading in the right direction more and more. And regardless, I think cannabis is heading in the right direction for all the hiccups that might be, happening along the way. But you've obviously helped a ton of people with your work. It's really incredible to see, and you certainly have a lot of patient stories. But was there anything in particular that was maybe one of the first times you truly realized how much you could affect change in someone's life?
I think that the very first time that I knew that I couldn't stop doing this because it was making that big of a difference in other people's lives. And if I really do believe that my life purpose is to be of service to others, then I couldn't say no. I had to do it. I mean, I was happily retired. I got to tell you, I didn't need to go back to work. Um, and there was a little 2-year-old girl that had astrocytoma, and her mother, a brain tumor, and her mother reached out to me and said, she's in so much pain. She's beating her head against the wall to try and get the pain out of her head. She's a baby. I just need to get her out of pain. And the child was in hospice at the time. And she said, I just need to get her out of pain. And I heard you can help and, anything. So we provided some medicine to the little girl. Immediately, dose 1, started feeling better.
Wow.
Great. But that's not the great part. I mean, that's wonderful. That's fantastic that we could help this 2-year-old not be in pain. But some of the symptoms, the balance, and other issues that she was having were starting to shift. And the mother went back to the pediatric oncologist and said, we want to do an MRI. And they said, well, you have to pay for it yourself because once they're in hospice, it's not covered. And long story short, that I don't remember who ended up paying for it. The MRI ended up happening. They found that the tumor was shrinking. And this was a child that they said there's no point in doing chemotherapy on her because it won't work. And she's going to die anyway. So all of a sudden, it was worth doing chemotherapy because it's the tumor shrinking. Well, that was February 2014. And since then, she's had a little brother. She's been in school. She's doing great. She has a full life. You'd never know there's anything wrong with her,
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
That's
You're going to say no to a bald baby? I mean, what are you going to do? Yeah.
that's incredible. I mean, talking to innovators and impact, I've heard some good answers to this type of question, but that's certainly one of the most powerful.
Yeah. I mean, it was a life. I mean, I had seen, like in Weed the People with like Chico, the fact that, the doctors have even said that they've never seen as bad of chemotherapy side effects, on anyone experienced at him. And yet he never missed a dose because of the cannabis. He was able to finish his regimen on time and make it through it. And the kid's in college now. He's doing fantastically. I mean, he's doing great. But there was something about this baby, something about this little girl that the world had written off. And now she's still with us. That's really gets to me.
That's incredible. I mean, you saved her life.
I didn't do anything. I just provided the medicine. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the medicine. The medicine is remarkable. I would never say that cannabis can cure anything, but it can certainly offer an awful lot of hope.
Yeah. it's amazing to see what it can do and the lives that it can affect. So thank you for sharing that. And I mentioned earlier that I think that, experiences in childhood really affect kind of the long-term outcome of people's lives. And, you mentioned learning about things like Tikkun Olam with your family growing up. But, was there a specific experience you can remember from childhood that showed you the importance of giving back, regardless of which side of that you were on?
There's just too many. I mean, when I was 9 years old, I was handing out flyers for Humphrey. When I was 13 years old, I was getting on a bus and going to the housing projects to teach 18-year-olds how to read. I mean, it's just always been in my DNA to be of service. It's I don't know. I can't even explain what it does. I mean, it's selfish. It's selfish because it makes me feel so happy to be of service.
I think it's great that it makes you feel good to be of service. And, was that when you first started doing that type of thing, was that something that your parents were pushing you to do, or is it something that just happened?
When I was 9 years old and I was in third grade, I had a teacher. Her name was Mrs. Lipman. And I was at yeshiva, so everybody was very straight laced and buttoned up. But she was a little bit more radical. Now, this was 1968, okay, 67, 68. And she was a supporter of Shirley Chisholm, who was running for president at the time. And she got me all fired up on the fact that we could change the world. We did not have to just accept things the way they were, and that we had to do something about it. It's like if you see something, say something. She taught that if there's things wrong in the world, you got to and you see it, you got to do something about it. And I internalized that to the nines, to say the least. Yeah.
I love that. I love, that you're referencing Mrs. Lipman, and to see just her effect on one person and how much that effect could reverberate into other people's lives is tremendous. And it just goes to show that people focused on their passions are probably making a bigger impact than they realize.
100%. I had a young woman when I was in university. She sent me and this was like right around graduation time, and she sent me a back in those times, a note. A letter, actually a handwritten with a stamp and snail mail, the whole 9 yards back in the olden days. And she was thanking me for something that I did or said that completely changed the course of her life. She changed her major, she changed her this, and she was letting me know that I had done this years ago, but that it was, she was now at the point where she was also graduating in graduate school. I had no recollection whatsoever of what she was talking about. And it made me very conscious of the fact that it can go both ways, because one of the things I'm known for is being unfiltered. And sometimes being unfiltered, the things that come out probably shouldn't have. And I am horrified to think that I could say something or do something that would hurt another person, because my intention, I would never intentionally hurt somebody. So yeah, it can go both directions. And hopefully I've done more good than bad, that's for sure.
That's important to point out, but yeah, I'm certain that you've done more good than bad. Um, and sort of in a similar vein, is there anyone that over these years that you've considered a mentor that's been really impactful?
I had, besides Mrs. Lippman, of course. And then when I was in high school, when I was in yeshiva, I had Rabbi Lauer, and I've kept in touch with him. And he was an inspiration to me, because he understood me and he accepted me. I was the kid in class that questioned everything. I was the one that was the most annoying person in class. And I would spend half my time sitting in his office just debating life, debating, besides debating Talmud. I mean, I would just, and he accepted me and nurtured some of that in me. There's a Dr. Emil Salia, who was my professor as an undergrad and a graduate, who was a Palestinian Christian. And I still am in touch with him too. And I always loved the fact that he saw my intelligence and my value when he should have been automatically stereotyped to not. Right. And I forgot to mention he was blind. So he didn't care
Wow.
if I had a cute smile. He didn't care any of that. Now, I would say Dr. Frank Feigert, who I'm still in, almost, at least once a week, I'm in touch with here also. He was my graduate advisor. And I've always known that they were there kind of for me. My mom was a little bit less of a serious person than I am. Let's put it that way, but my Aunt Zelda was kind of a surrogate mentor to me. And sadly, I lost her years ago also. Of course, I've lost everybody in the family, but she was always there as to be the one to kind of give me a different perspective on things. In cannabis, I have not really found any mentors, unfortunately, but I take lessons from everybody every chance I get and incorporate them where it makes sense. I'm always looking. The man who's funding the software platform, he has taught me so much about how to be in a meeting and just keep my mouth shut, just shut up. He said, let them talk. I mean, obviously, I'm in a podcast with you. I'm doing this. I'm supposed to be talking, but he has taught me so much about how to get other people to talk more in a meeting than me. And you would think at this stage of life I would have learned this, but I haven't.
Well, I think it's great that you're open to learning still and adapting and always adapting.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always say I know exactly what I know, and when I learn more and I know more, I'll know more then, and I'll do more, and I'll do differently. Everything I'm doing now is based upon old information. But if I
Yeah.
have new information, and it makes sense, then I'll change. It's otherwise I'm just stagnant, standing water.
Well, there's not enough people that share that mindset, so I hope it continues to spread.
Well, I started Aunt Zelda as I was 51 years old. And so it's never too late to, learn a new way of being and doing things. And, I feel like I've been a student my whole life. And it's just, I've got my hand up yelling at the world to give me more and better information.
Love that perspective, and really appreciate all that you've shared. And this last question is one that I'm asking every guest that's joining me. If you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
This is a difficult question because there's just too many things, especially if you believe in the butterfly effect. So I'm going to approach this with the butterfly effect. And I'm going to say, if I could fix the access, and I mean access meaning, affordable, convenient, everything else, to high quality food everywhere in the world, then I believe that would do so much to hedge disease and wars, and that includes clean water, that includes fresh fruits and vegetables, all those sorts of things. I feel like food is the first medicine, and if we have good quality food, we need less medicine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would first solve the inequality in that we haven't access to good, healthy foods. We solve that, we can then, of course, cannabis obviously has some purposes as a food in there as well. And obviously, I want everybody to have access to that, anywhere in the world that they need it. And I thought about, if I answer this as, have access to cannabis. Well, that's, first let's solve it where people don't need cannabis and they don't need it as a medicine because they're not getting sick. Well, what's it going to take to not get them sick? And
Right.
that's, a better foods.
Yeah. I think access to high quality nutrition is certainly something that would reverberate. So I really like that answer.
Good. You look at some of the people like, the Mediterranean diet and the life expectancy in certain groups based upon what they eat. And then you look at, the fact that in the United States, people live a relatively long time, but are they really living? I mean, what's their quality of life? And I think that we really need to impact that with better nutrition and better access. You go into the lower income areas and you go into the stores where many times people have to walk to them because they don't have transportation, and their access is junk food. It's only junk, overpriced, sugary, and starchy junk food. And you give these same people access to quality fruits and vegetables and other things. And I think that, diabetes goes down, all sorts of other diseases go down, cancers go down.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And, thank you for sharing, and thank you for all that you do, and for all the patients that you help. You're an inspiration, and I love the work that you do, and appreciate your friendship and support. And thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. To find out more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.